Hey, welcome back. Today we're looking again at Measure for Measure, Acts 3 through 5. I intended to do just one video of this play, but I wound up having so much to say that I ran way long and had to cut it in half. So I'm making a new intro for part 2. Last time we discussed the setup in Acts 1 and 2. Here we are in Vienna, where the Duke has basically given up his responsibility, stepped down to go on vacation, and put in charge Angelo. And although Angelo looks like somebody who always follows the rules, and here he is coming down really, really hard, so much so that he even throws Claudio in jail and is preparing to kill him for sleeping with his fiancée. But by the end of Act 2, Angelo is succumbing to temptation as well. He sees the beautiful Isabella, Claudio's sister, who is pleading for Claudio. And here she is, this sweet, innocent nun. And Angelo becomes very, very tempted to try to seduce her. And when she is horrified at his suggestions, then he begins to use his power to really crush her, threatening to torture Claudio if she doesn't give in to him, telling her that she has no real power. No one will ever believe her over him because he has all of the power. What is Isabella going to do now? We'll find out as we continue our discussion of Acts 3 through 5. Act 3, we come to the turning point in most Shakespeare plays, as in Act 3. The Duke, who is disguised as the friar, is speaking to Claudio and trying to help him let go of life. He is to die. In comes Isabella to tell him the result of her conversation with Angelo. And so the Duke kind of listens outside the door with the provost. Isabella tells him what happened, and she says, "There's no hope for you." And basically, she cuts to that point. Well, except for the one, but it's not a hope worth pursuing. Claudio has very complicated mixed feelings here, obviously. And he hears that there is a potential hope. What is it? Can you just explain the situation to me? I don't want to die. And she does, and his response is, "Thou shalt not do it." And Isabel says, "Oh, worried about my life, I'd throw it down for your deliverance as frankly as a pin." No, of course you can't do that. Of course you can't do that, Isabella. But I don't want to die. And Claudio begins to feel how very terrifying his mortality is. And he begins to rationalize and say, but surely it can't be that wrong. I know you don't want to do anything wrong, but surely it can't be that wrong if, Angelo is the one saying you should do it, right? Come on, it's my life. But to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clod, and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than the worst of those that lawless and in uncertain thought imagine howling, oh, 'tis too horrible. The weariest and the most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death. Sweet sister, let me live. What sin you do to save a brother's life, nature dispenses with the deed so far that it becomes a virtue. You'll be doing it to save my life, so it'll really be a good thing. Isabella is horrified with her brother's breakdown and the fact that he can't hold onto his courage enough to defend her honor. And she has an outburst at this point. "Take my defiance, die, perish. Might but my bending down reprieve thee from thy fate, it should proceed. I'll pray 1,000 prayers for thy death, nowhere to save thee." She's so angry with him, so angry that he would feed her to the disgusting Angelo, that she says, "You know what? If I could save you right now in a moment by snapping my fingers, I wouldn't do it." Fortunately, at this moment, the Duke intervenes and calms them both down, and he tells Claudio, Angelo didn't really mean it. There's no way you can be saved. He was just testing your sister, so you just need to accept your death. Go ahead and get your mind right. But then he turns to Isabella and says privately to her, "I have an idea, something that we can do that might help you out of this situation. I heard everything. I know what's going on. Let me see what I can do to help you." And so then he begins to tell the story of a woman whose name is Mariana. Now, Mariana is Angelo's old fiancée, and they were going to get married, and then something happened to Mariana's dowry. A ship went down at sea, she lost her dowry, and so Angelo, being a jerk, just abandoned her. "Oh, you don't have money? Never mind then." And so here's Mariana, who has been brokenhearted for a few years because of what Angelo had done to her. Wait a second, the Duke knew this about Angelo. The Duke knew that Angelo was a heartless cad, and yet he put him in this office. That's interesting, that's interesting. But Mariana is sort of without recourse. She has no chance of getting married now without a dowry. She has no chance of a future. And she's been desperately in love with Angelo, who abandoned her. Maybe we could do something to help Mariana out and also help you out. We're gonna play the old switcheroo. It'll be lying, but you know, it's kind of Christian lying, because the ends justify the means. And Isabella goes along with it because the Duke is dressed as a friar, and so he looks like her, you know, spiritual father. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have you agree to sleep with Angelo, but then we'll sneak Mariana in there instead in the dead of night and let them sleep together. That way Angelo has committed the crime, but he's done it with his fiancée, who he was supposed to marry a long time ago anyway. And then maybe we can sort of coerce him into fulfilling his vows and marrying Mariana, and you can get away with your purity, and your brother gets away with his life. All's well that ends well, as the other problem play says. Isabella says this sounds like an interesting plan, and so she agrees to go along with it. In scene 2 of Act 3, it looks like Bumpy's been arrested again. And this time, the Duke bumps into Lucio. And the Duke finds Lucio a very irritating and obnoxious person. One of the recurring conversations throughout the play, Lucio has been talking about, what happened to the Duke? I wonder what happened to the Duke. He's gossiping. And he wonders where the Duke went, what the Duke is up to. And so he begins this sort of conversation with the Duke himself, who's disguised as a friar. And he begins to make up all these stories about how loose and licentious the Duke really is. And if you knew him, I know him so well. And of course, the Duke is very, very irritated to have himself slandered like this. Lucio also laughs off Pompey's request for bail. And the Duke is kind of mortified by the way things are going in his town. Now that he actually gets to see it, he's mortified by the way Lucio talks about him. He's mortified by the kind of people that populate Vienna. And he hears Mistress Overdone being arrested as well. There she goes. And in comes Aeschylus, the one person who the Duke kind of trusts. And the Duke briefly asks, you know, how do you feel about the Duke? And so he gets to hear from really everyone what everyone thinks of him. Aeschylus is, of course, the most generous. As everyone leaves, the Duke has a brief soliloquy. He who the sword of heaven will bear should be as holy as severe, pattern in himself to know, grace to stand, and virtue go, more nor less to others paying, than by self-offences weighing, shame to him whose cruel striking kills for faults of his own liking. Twice treble shame on Angelo, to weed my vice and let his grow. Oh, what may man within him hide, though angel on the outward side? How may likeness made in crimes, making practice on the times, to draw with idle spider's strings most ponderous and substantial things? Craft against vice I must apply, with Angelo tonight shall lie his old betrothed, but despise it. So disguise shall, by the disguised, pay with falsehood, false exacting, and perform an old contracting. So he's thinking about the plot that he stirred up. He talks about those who hold the sword of heaven. He's talking, of course, of Angelo, who's holding the sword of justice, but he may also be reflecting on himself, who failed in the job as well. And he's seeing the repercussions in the way everyone thinks of him. Act 4. Act 4 begins with the Duke/Friar going to meet with Mariana to get her ready for this trick. And it opens with her listening to music. She apologizes for listening to music. She's not merry, but the song is a sad song that makes her feel something. It's a fantastic song about heartbreak and about somebody who left you and abandoned you, just like she feels about Angelo. Isabella then comes in and says, yes, she has agreed with Angelo. He's shown her the meeting place. And so now both of them convince Mariana to go along with this scheme. In scene 2, we have Pompey, who again was arrested, but now the provost is giving him a job in the jail. Why don't you help us out as an executioner? Tomorrow we have a couple people who are supposed to be executed, Claudio and Barnardine. And so he becomes an apprentice of Abhorsen, the executioner, who's very dark and ominous. And he calls his profession a mystery. And so now we have a former tapster bod who is something of a comic relief character who is working for a very ominous executioner. In comes the Duke, disguised as the friar still, and he says, hey, has any word come about any changes to plan for Claudio? Because by now we should have had everything go down. Angelo should have sent word. Just after he says that, there is a knock on the door, and in comes a message, and it says, kill Claudio right now, and send me his head so I can know for certain that he is dead, dead, dead. Angelo. Not those exact words, but more or less. And the Duke is very vexed. So here's Angelo, who decides to cover for his crime, but not by paying the way he intended, by setting free Claudio, but rather by covering up for it by killing Claudio. And then he's going to denounce poor Isabella after using her. The Duke, not revealing who he is, but with an insistence that he knows that the real Duke is coming back to town, says, you can't kill Claudio right now. We've got to come up with another plan. You've got to send him a different head. This isn't going to work. What? You're supposed to kill Barnardine too? Why don't you send him Barnardine's head? And you can, rough it up a little bit, shave it, and braid his beard, so it's hard to tell who it really is. Provost is hesitant to go against the wishes of Angelo, but when the Duke shows him a paper that says the real Duke is coming back to town, the Provost goes ahead and accepts it and goes along with it, because he doesn't want to kill Claudio either. Meanwhile, Pompey is getting ready to help execute Barnardine, and he's laughing at the fact that all his old friends are here in prison. But Barnardine refuses to be executed. And apparently, again, there's no justice in this book at all. No justice except for horrendously corrupt justice. Everybody's like, you don't want to get killed? Okay, what are we going to do about that? I don't know. The Duke, disguised as a friar, tries to talk him into taking his last rites, but Barnard's like, no, come back later. I don't want to be killed today. Unfit to live or die. Oh, gravel heart. Creature unprepared, unmeet for death. And to transport him in the mind, he is were damnable. So because they can't get him to take his last rites, they're like, we don't want to kill you if you haven't taken your last rites. Fortunately, the Provost says, oh, we have a prisoner who just died of sickness, and he looks a lot more like Claudio than Barnardine does anyway. So let's just send his head. Okay, we'll forgive Barnardine. Just let him, sit for another day. He's too grumpy to be killed anyway. In comes Isabella, and the Duke decides not to tell her that he saved her brother's life. Instead, he tells her, oh, I'm sorry, he was actually executed, and his head was just sent to Angelo. She's horrified, but the Duke assures her that the Duke is coming to town and that he will set all things right. She needs to just appeal to him. And so the Duke gets ready to make his big return, and he has one more frustrating conversation with Lucio, where Lucio continues to mock the Duke. In scene 4, Aeschylus and Angelo are very confused. They keep getting these conflicting letters from the Duke saying when he's coming home and where he's coming home, and they don't really know what's going on. And they're very confused. But it sounds like he's about to come home, and he also wants, when he enters the gate, for them to open up an appeal moment for anybody who feels they've been wronged in his absence to come up and make an appeal. Why is he doing that? Angelo, obviously, feels very uncomfortable about that. Meanwhile, in scene 5, the Duke has gone back to his friend Friar Peter and says, I want you to go with the ladies to go appeal, because I've got to come in as the Duke. I can't be a friar anymore. And scene 6, Isabella and Mariana are ready to appeal. They're with Friar Peter, and in Act 5, we're going to see how that appeal goes. And so we come to the grand conclusion in Act 5, where Isabella is going to appeal before the Duke against Angelo and ask for him to right her wrongs. So the Duke enters into the town. There's Angelo and Aeschylus ready to greet him. Ah, so good to see you. Welcome back home, sir. Everything went great in your absence. When all of a sudden, up comes Isabella, who kneels before the Duke, and she calls out for justice. And the Duke's like, oh, you want justice? Well, why didn't you go to Angelo? Because, he's my deputy, and he's been the one running things lately. And she says, no, I need justice against him. The Duke says, unlikely story. Angelo? Doing wrong? Not our good buddy Angelo, who's so pure. You must be crazy, lady. O prince, I conjure thee, as thou believest there is another comfort than this world, that thou neglect me not with that opinion that I am touched with madness. Make not impossible that which seems unlike. 'Tis not impossible, but one, the wickedest caitiff on the ground, may seem as shy, as grave, as just, as absolute as Angelo. Even so may Angelo, in all his dressings, cataracts, titles, forms, be an arch villain. Believe it, royal prince. If he be less, he's nothing, but he's more. had I more name for badness. The Duke says, well, fine, I'll listen to it. Isabel begins to tell her story, and Lucio keeps chiming in, much to the Duke's annoyance. The Duke says, no, that's impossible. Angelo is too pure, too good. He wouldn't have done such a thing. Someone set you on this, didn't you? Someone's trying to get Angelo in trouble. And so he arrests Isabella and says, I bet it's that friar that you've been hanging out with, Friar Lodovic. And Lucio's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. He and I had all kinds of conversations. He was saying terrible things about you, Duke. And up comes the other friar, Friar Peter, who says, oh yes, I know him, but he's sick. He can't be here right now. And he says, but there's another witness here, and it's Mariana. And Mariana comes up veiled. She's giving really cryptic riddles about how she is neither married nor a maid. When Angelo tells her to remove her veil, she does, saying, my husband bids me so. And so there's Mariana, and Angelo, of course, is shocked. And he hears from Mariana what happened. But, of course, not wanting to get in trouble, he begins to deny everything and say, oh, no, this woman is in league with all of them. And the Duke says, yes, and we need to hear from that friar. By the way, you know what? I'm putting all of this in your hands, Aeschylus, and in your hands, Angelo. You two can be the judge. I don't have to judge this. I'm going to step out for a minute. I'll be right back. And he jumps into a phone booth and spins around, coming out as the friar. Not really, but you know, more or less. So in comes the Duke disguised as the friar, along with the provost and Isabella, and all of them are standing before Angelo. Everyone is staring at this strange friar thinking, this is the guy who is accusing Angelo, huh? This is the guy who's slandering our dear beloved Angelo. And the Duke says, oh, but the Duke can't touch me. I'm not from around here. I'm just a looker-on, and I see how bad everything is in Vienna. And Aeschylus and Angelo are horrified at this guy and want to throw him in jail. At that moment, Lucio comes up to him and rips off his hood to say, let's see your face. Oh, it's the Duke. And Lucio goes, oh, oops. And Angelo goes, oh. The Duke arrests Lucio, immediately pardons Aeschylus, and then turns his heat on Angelo. Angelo knows he's toast at this point. And so the Duke metes out his justice. He says, I know everything, I saw everything. So, Angelo, you marry Mariana immediately, and then I'm going to execute you. That way, Mariana can be an honorable woman, and she will get your estate. Then he turns to Isabella and says, Isabella, I am so sorry. You may wonder why I didn't step up in my ducally capacity and fix all of your problems rather than just playing games with you. The fact was that I tried, but it didn't work out quite the way I intended. In comes back in Angelo, already married to Mariana, and he says, now I'm going to go ahead and kill you, Angelo. Mariana then pleads and says, would you take away my husband now that I've had one for 38 seconds? The Duke says, it is your husband mocked you with a husband. Consenting to the safeguard of your honor, I thought your marriage fit, else imputation for that he knew you might reproach your life and choke your good to come. For his possessions, although by confiscation they are ours, we do insate and widow you with all to buy you a better husband. And she says, oh, my dear lord, I crave no other nor no better man. And when Mariana's pleas fall on deaf ears, she turns to Isabella and says, please, plead for Angelo for me. So we have this rather hard moment where Isabella has to forgive the creep who tried to use his power to steal her virginity from her. The man who twisted around and killed her brother, the corrupt monster, and used her power with the Duke to beg mercy for him. And she does, which is hard for some of us. The plays that end in a kind of forgiveness are hard for a lot of us. A lot of people hate the ending of Cymbeline for a similar reason. But there is an intense power in forgiveness. However, this play is painful in that right in the moment that Isabella uses her power to forgive, she finally has power over this man, and she uses that power to forgive. And Angelo is then excused. He gets to marry Mariana, and she gets to have a husband. The Duke then does his little, sleight of hand thing and says, well, actually, ta-da, I didn't really let your brother die. Here he is. He actually blames the provost and says, Provost, how dare you have killed him? What a bad thing to do. And the provost said, well, I saved this other guy named Barnardine. And the Duke says, well, we'll just forgive him. And oh, also, you saved another prisoner. How interesting. Who is he? Ah, it's your brother. Look at that. In any case, the Duke uses that moment to win Isabella over and be like, haha, look, it was all a trick, all's well, everything's okay, look, I played a really fun game on everybody and it all came out okay. You know what, I don't feel it's okay. And at that moment, on top of all of it, the Duke uses that audacity to be like, and you know what, not only that, but we're gonna have a wedding, I'm gonna marry you now, Isabella. And that is the most painful moment of all. Is it possible that Isabella is suddenly like, oh yay, I get to marry the Duke? Not a chance. Not a chance. I cannot see her being happy with the outcome of this play. She wanted to become a nun. She did not want to marry. Not only that, but the guy who tricked her this entire play and pretended to be a spiritual father for her was really a manipulative duke. He's a creep with power too. It's really impossible not to see that at the end here, which is why, again, we call this one of the problem plays. Creeps and power are bad things, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So, although this is a very, very painful play, it's one that is very honest with the way the world works. So I ran out of time and had a couple more things that I wanted to say. Wow, this play is so intense and full of really horrible things. I'd like to come back to the idea of the comedy as we close out. There are 4 weddings at the end of this, or potential weddings, and yet all of them are highly unpleasant. There's the forced wedding between Angelo and Mariana, and although Mariana gets the husband that she wants, she clearly doesn't get the husband she deserves. And yeah, Angelo gets some mercy, but I don't know about that relationship. It's yuck. And we have the really haunting wedding between potentially the Duke and Isabella, and we know that that's going to be awful. I didn't mention yet, but before the Duke closes the play, he pulls up Lucio, who you know he really hates because of all the times Lucio has spread slanders about him. And he condemns Lucio to death. But because Lucio has an illegitimate child with a prostitute who he has rejected, the Duke puts aside the execution and instead has Lucio marry the prostitute, much to Lucio's horror. Again, another awful wedding. Lucio really has it coming, but you know that marriage is not gonna be that great either. There's one more marriage, and the only one with any potential happiness, and that is the marriage of Claudio and Juliet. We assume that they're going to get married after this play, now that Claudio is restored to life. And after all, they did want to get married. But you know there's a lot of psychological trauma there too. Both of them feel immensely guilty about their relationship. We've hammered that home. So it is a comedy that cannot end happily, even though we end it with the traditional big marriage arrangement. Shakespeare shows us the problems of power, the fact that really corrupt people tend to desire power, but also that sometimes people are corrupted by power. When given the opportunity for licentiousness, well, then they go wild. There's no order in Vienna, there's no positive leadership. It's a very discouraging play. But Shakespeare, as he often does, doesn't give us the answer. He just shows us who we are and what our problems are. And we've got to figure it out for ourselves. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or to watch another video, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.